What we have right now before we begin is I'm in the classroom in the Headco building,
Okay,
and 20, like we talked about, of 26 really fabulous graduate students. We are on the unit of attention, so they are going to be learning with your community that you've put together.
cool.
So I think that it's really exciting to have people that are in training, those of us that have been doing this for a long time, and those of you that have uh, been working in the field and also, most importantly, living with lived experience. So I'm really excited to have us be together. Um,
Yes, I'm excited about this too. And thanks and hi everyone who's there. So great.
I think what I'll do is turn the camera around for 1 second so that before we officially begin, so that you can meet my class. Is that okay? So this is, I want,
That's great. Um,
so
yeah,
there,
I'm excited. I'm excited about this opportunity and that discussion between what brain injured people are dealing with and what the people around the brain injured people are learning and seeing is a very important, so I'm really excited about this opportunity. Thanks.
the slides that I'm showing you for are what are slides for their class by and large also. Is there anything you want to share before we begin, Daniel?
I could say a little bit about what this project is about, and
That'd be
thank
great.
you, McKay, for being a part of this. So, um, basically, with since my brain injury, I felt like I wasn't really being understood by the people around me, and I also had a few years where I was trying to share, and it's hard to open up, and it's hard to ask for help, and then you do that, and then it's like still there's a falling short or like a disconnect, a lost in translationness, and I just kind of got used to that, and then as I improved and did, got into science and got, through PhD, through postdoc, I still saw that disconnect. And then when I met people in the support groups in Eugene, every single person had their own version of that. I was like, okay, that's how do we target that? So that became this talk and also the podcast where I speak to brain injured people one on one about their problems. And I'm really excited to talk about attention because that's a great just way to get into it. So I think ask questions if you want, and people in the on the podcast or sorry on the Zoom end can also ask questions. Raise your hands, or you can because I'm hoping to get the discussion that is really I don't. It's hard to discuss. I don't know how to discuss it, so I'm glad we're doing this. Cool.
Great. There's no right way. Okay, so it looks like we're on time and it's recording. Welcome, everybody who's taken the time to come learn about attention. Um, as you heard Daniel and I talking about, this lecture is being given in a graduate class, Cognitive Rehabilitation at the University of Oregon, with the spirit of having those of us that are working in the field collaborate and learn with people who are living with some of these issues. So this is exciting for us. What I was going to propose as a plan, there's 3 areas that I want to review in our time together. I want to talk about a couple key concepts in pretty broad strokes about how we think about attention, give some examples of assessment of attention, just talk a little bit about when we see somebody who comes in and says, I'm really bothered by my attention, how we might approach it. And then an overview of the different methods in which we might partner with somebody to help them with their attention challenges. And then I'm going to focus on one particular intervention, and that's what we've been doing in the class. And this one is going to be computer-based attention training, and I'll explain why I picked that. And then I'll end with a case example. I'll stop a couple times, Daniel, and just ask if there's any particular questions or any review that would be helpful in order to make sure that people are still with me. Does that sound like an okay process?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'll say something that from the brain injured people's personal perspective side, I look at this as a good opportunity to see how you're thinking about it, and then hopefully the personal stuff can come out more in the end. But I don't want to,
Okay,
for the sake of time, I'll try to help manage that.
great. Okay,
Great.
let's get started then. I want to begin with some key considerations, thinking about how you understand all cognitive domains, not just attention. I think sometimes there's a temptation to silo them and think about attention or memory as separate. But we know that cognitive domains are complex and multifactorial. We know that they interact so that attention, memory, executive functions like organization and planning all overlap with one another. We also know that cognition, including attention, is affected by a myriad, just a whole host of different types of other states. For example, a psychological state of when you're anxious, that affects your attention. If you're not feeling well, that affects your attention. So physical and psychological states can really drive attention issues. Sometimes we see people with attention issues after a pretty mild injury where they have a lot of anxiety about recovery, and the main driver is not changes to their brain, but anxiety. So we know that cognition is highly sensitive to a whole bunch of different types of factors. What I want to do now is say a few words specifically about the cognitive domain of attention. Again, that it's not a unitary concept, that it's complex, has multiple components, and that the components are derived from different types of models, which I'll say a little bit more about. What I thought would be helpful is to see a list of components of attention that no matter what type of model or theory you're coming from, these components of attention are often what's accounted for. So I'm going to let you look at this list. You'll see at the top it says attention is multidimensional. And there's 4 big components that almost all models talk about. One is speed of processing. So many people after a head injury complain about, I can get it, but I can't process it fast enough. It's their speed of information processing that is frustrating. Another very common issue is capacity. I can get it, but I can't hold on to very much. So it used to be able to tell me a phone number, I could hold on to it, or a password until I got back to my table at the coffee shop. But now by the time I get there, I cannot hold on to it. And that temporary scratch pad of holding on to what someone says or trying to pull out something from your memory and hold on to it is called working memory, and it's very essential. Another aspect of attention is sustained attention. And you hear a lot about that when we're talking about cognitive fatigue. For a lot of people, it's, I'm pretty good for a while, and then after 10 minutes, I cannot keep focusing. So it's just the time dimension of how long someone can continue to direct their attention. This next category says attentional control, and it is talking about being able to, it's a very high level type of attention, and it's being able to direct your attention. So if somebody has a job, a desk job, and they have to answer phones, talk to people when they come up to their desk, do keyboarding, they're going back and forth between different tasks, having different cognitive demands. That's an alternating attention task. Divided attention is doing 2 things at once. And we can do that if they're not the same type of, like both being verbal tasks or both being visual tasks. And then selective attention is being able to have freedom from distraction or not pay attention to the unwanted information. Okay. So when you have difficulties in one or more of these areas, at the bottom of the slide, it gives you some examples of what it might affect, like hard to concentrate and hold a conversation. So we're looking at people's functional complaints about attention. Where is their attention issue getting in the way of what they want to do in their day-to-day? Being able to hold on to a phone number and dial it. Inability to switch topics in a conversation. Inability to refocus on cooking after the phone rings. Inability to do homework with the TV on. These are common issues with attention that might be functional tasks that are affected because of attention. I thought it might be kind of interesting for each of you to monitor your own attention. So right now, if you could think about your sustained attention, like how do you feel as I'm talking? Do you feel like it's very low, like you can't keep focused? Give it a 1. all the way up to it's pretty good. That would be a 5. So between 1 and 5, how do you feel your sustained attention is? How about your working memory between 1 and 5? Are you able to hold on to information? And then are you using any strategies to help you? Okay. And then I'm going to ask you this again in a while and see if it's anything has gotten worse or better. Okay. So you're rating your sustained attention, your working memory, and whether you're using any strategies during this talk.
McKay, can you make the slides bigger? I think we see your screen plus the next screen. Can you focus on the slides that are the one being presented? Sorry. Oh,
I have a bunch of people here smarter than I am. Is that better?
yeah, now we see the only slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fanning.
We've had a lot of funny issues like this over. Sorry about
You're
that.
no, that's super helpful. That's why we're working together. Great.
Um,
Okay. So this slide is just something to remind us that there's a whole science behind attention that identifies the different components. And you and I, Daniel, have had some back and forth about different types of attention. So there's neuroanatomic models that look at brain regions. There's cognitive processing models that talk about the flow of information. And there's factor analytic models that kind of group attention in different types. So I'm not going to go through any of these in detail. So now I can't advance it. Okay, I'll just do it by. So this is a famous neuroanatomic model where there's 3 different systems for 3 different types of attention. I don't want to go into the details, but just letting you know that there's a science behind all of this. This is a cognitive processing model, which is a very interesting model because its centerpiece is that there's a central executive that's the controller, and that you can direct your attention. Your central executive will tell you when to focus, and it kind of takes over. It doesn't have a capacity for storing information, but it regulates what you pay attention to. So you could take an example like reading. If you pay attention to every word on the page, it would be too much. And what you do, an effective reader will kind of disregard the unimportant parts and then keep building on the important parts. And it's this central executive that's working while you're reading to do that. And it can focus on phonological information, visual spatial information, or an integration between them. So that is what I wanted to say about different processes. And just a reminder that there's a whole science that breaks down attention into different components, and that we look to see where people have breakdowns and what kinds of functions it affects. And we do that, so I want to say a little bit about assessment, sometimes by giving attention tests. So on this slide, you'll see that there's examples of tests that evaluate a specific type of attention, and then there's batteries that evaluate multiple components. So for example, at the top, it says sustained attention. Many of you may have had a test that's a digit span forward, and where you're given numbers and then you have to say them back. That's an example of a sustained or vigilance task. Another one's called the Connors. It's very used a lot, and you press a button every time you see a certain symbol that's been indicated on the computer screen. And they look at reaction time and whether you fade in your attention over time. Then there's tests of that working memory, being able to hold on to information. And I list 3 different tests there that are very common tests that you might have from a neuropsychologist. That looks at your ability to hold on to information in a temporary scratch pad as it comes on. And then you'll see a next category, it's mixed batteries. And in our class next Monday, we're going to learn a battery called the test of everyday attention that gets at a bunch of different components. The last line on there talks about questionnaires. And if I could only do one thing, I would talk to somebody, use a attention questionnaire, and try to learn what's getting in the way with them, for them with attention. this next slide is a page from such a questionnaire that I might do that with. So you've got it's called the ARMS, attention, rating, and monitoring. And the first one, you're rating how often these things occur, like difficulty returning to a task after being interrupted. You could say never, rarely, occasionally, frequently, or always. Or difficulty doing more than one thing at a time. So that's like divided attention. Being easily distracted by things that are going on around you. That's like selective attention. Difficulty concentrating, this is very tiny for me, in busy or noisy situations, for example, in shopping centers. That's another selective attention function. Difficulty concentrating or keeping your mind on an activity for more than a few minutes. That's an example of a sustained attention question. Becoming too fatigued during or after activities where you have to pay attention. That's another sustained attention. Difficulty remembering a train of thought or keeping things in order. For example, when doing simple calculations, that's a working memory task. So there's a long list of these functions, and then we can ask people about them as well as tell me what's getting in the way of your day. And then we can say, oh, it really seems like sustained attention and working memory are the two biggies for this individual. And then together we can design an intervention to help. So that's an example of assessment. We might have specific tests, or we might have this conversation with a questionnaire to try to identify where the breakdown is in somebody's individual attention. And most of the time, people will have a few areas that are impaired because these attention issues hang together. So it seems like what we've done here is we've said, okay, there's different models of attention, and we break them down different ways. And we've said we've got a couple different ways to test it and kind of figure out, which type or component of attention, which of them seem to be most disruptive to this individual, and what is it preventing them from doing? And then together with our clients, we can suggest some options for, and we can do computerized direct training. So that's an example, and I'm going to talk about that in detail. That's what we're spending most of our time on. And it lists some, you might have heard of CogMed or Lumosity on the radio. Specific skills training. Sometimes someone says the attention is just getting in the way. The thing I need to do is being able to cook for my family, and I can't stick with it, and I really want to be able to cook for my family. So maybe we'll come up with a cooking routine and we'll work on one function. Maybe we'll work on some strategies for that they can compensate or that eventually might even help their attention. Something like pacing, like I'll do the hard stuff in the first few minutes while I have more energy, and then I'll take a break. We might use external aids or what we call assistive technology, like apps. I'm going to show you examples of these. We might do some environmental modification or task, like maybe we're going to shorten the amount of time, like your work day, or the order in which you do things, or we're going to have visual cues. And we also will always do some personalized education and make sure that people understand their strengths, the things that are hard, and that together we can make sure they have a good understanding of their own cognitive processing. So these are examples of treatments that we might work on, and that what these 26 students in my class are learning about this term in order to be able to address attention deficits, and not only with brain injury, but there's a whole bunch of developmental conditions that have these types of attention issues and would use similar interventions as well. So let's pick a few of these treatments and talk for a moment about them. One is the third bullet, that's just a fancy term, metacognitive strategy training. And I'd like to give you some examples of attention strategies. These are specific strategies that might help with different kinds of attention issues. So one is self-talk. Sometimes if people are losing focus, if they talk out loud, like, okay, first I'm going to get all the ingredients out, put them on the counter, and check them off on the recipe. Okay, now I'm gonna do step one and check it off so that they're talking themselves through it. Then sometimes we can fade it to internal talk where it's in their head. So self-talk is sometimes helpful for people with difficulty with sustained and focused attention. Closing eyes, which you can't do during certain tasks like reading or driving, but you could do it for other kinds of tasks, and that might be helpful for people with kind of selective attention if they can screen out visual distractors. Or we know with kids, sometimes we'll position them in the front of the classroom so that they aren't as distracted, or we may even put kind of barriers around desks if people are concentrating. Or we have students with attention issues. They may choose to go to a place where they aren't going to be distracted. So that would be an example of an environmental modification. Sometimes focusing, we might teach people strategies of breathing or body alert. We've done that with a lot of adolescents where you get them in a position in a classroom where they're ready to pay attention. So feet on the ground, hands quiet, head towards the teacher. Check in with your body. Is your body quiet? So if that's an issue for a particular kid. Prediction. Sometimes we'll have people focus themselves by predicting what's going to be hard, what's going to be easy, and what they might do about it. So sort of a ready set. And I already mentioned pacing. So these are just examples of different types of strategies that people might select. I could tell you 100 of them. For people to be a good candidate for this, it means they have to have pretty good awareness of what's their attention issue is, and they have to be able to initiate independently using a strategy. So it's not helpful sometimes for people with severe memory issues, or people who have trouble with initiation, or maybe people who have a lack of self-awareness. So it's not that every type of treatment is a good match to every person. And we would talk with people and together come up with what's going to be a good match. So this again is one example of a broad treatment approach, which is coming up with attention strategies that would allow people to manage their attention challenges. A whole nother treatment approach is, let's see, move that out of the way, is to teach people external aids, or we call it assistive technology. And I put some examples of apps. These apps are just for sustained attention and focus. There's other apps for other types of attention. These are 3 common ones. So this would be for someone who just has trouble keeping going and staying focused. Serene is a task-focused app where you can set your goals and then you block distractions while you work on your tasks. Forest, I've had a number of university clients in our concussion clinic really like this. It's an app that encourages you to stay off your phone. So if your people are kind of drawn by their social media or other things, you can plant a virtual tree and it will grow while you focus. But if you leave the app to check your phone, your tree dies and you're sad. So in a way, it gamifies productivity and helps you visualize your focus time. So I've had some students who are who are having trouble getting through homework. They've had a mild injury and they're not able to focus, use the Forest app for a while, and then they do get better. And then another one on here is Focus Keeper, and I only put that on there because it emphasizes the amount of time that you're going to work on something. You set a timer, then it cues you to take a 5-minute break. And then after 4 sessions, it cues you to take a longer break. So coming up with all kinds of different apps or different external aids that might help people with attention deficits is something else we might do. We would do an assessment, like what's helped you in the past? Do you use a smartphone? What are kinds of things that they have problems with, and then we would try to match them with a device that would allow them to do what they want to do and manage their attention issues. Let me just check in with you, Daniel. How's this going? Is this at a pace that's working for you?
I
And
think it's a good pace. I think it's very informative. And so yeah, if anyone has any questions, great. And if not, let's keep going and then maybe we can ask questions
okay,
at the
all
end.
right. And maybe you could just break in if you sense that it would be good for me to answer some questions.
I could say that just in the last two slides, I appreciate the distinction between this one strategy might work for one person and not for another person. And it sounds like the assessments you do are critical because I know I don't like technology, but the earlier examples of the breathing were stuff that I was able to relate with from before my brain injury, and so I could use it. And
Nice.
the distinction, like people can be so different, and what works for one person can be very hard for another person.
I think,
Also,
Daniel, your point is really important. You know, if you've seen one brain injury, you've only seen one brain injury, as the saying goes, and how unique everybody's brains are going into it, the strengths and challenges coming out of it, and what people's demands are in their lives and our personalities and what our preferences are. And so Daniel's reminding us and me and our class how important it is to work together to understand everybody's individual profiles. So thank you for that.
the example you gave with the student in the desk who's been isolated for the
Mhm.
space of it, that can bring a lot of shame. And if you're the one that has to go to the extra place, you're dealing with a lot of emotionality, so you're breathing about that plus working on the attention. So it's a there's a lot happening there.
Absolutely. If somebody didn't say, I just want to sit up there and not have and screen everyone out, it wouldn't be a good match. Yeah. Okay, so the reason I picked this topic of spending a little more time on computer-based cognitive rehabilitation is because it's so marketed now. It's $1 billion industry, and all of these students here will be getting lots of deals on programs. Also, when you go to hospitals, still you see people that programs that put people in front of computers, or people get marketed to, if I just do this computer app every day, it'll make me better. So I think it's important to look at the research and talk a little bit about when it's helpful and when it's not. In our class, we're going to have a chance to read some of that research, but I wanted to spend some time focusing on it in this talk as well. So we call it CBCR, computer-based cognitive rehabilitation. We really only do this primarily for attention because we've only seen any changes in that domain. And this is a complicated slide, so I want to say a little bit about where this came from. It used to be that we would think about computer drills as changing the brain. And we used to think, oh, it's going to restore it versus a strategy, the ones I've been reviewing, that it's going to help you compensate. And we don't use that dichotomy of restorative versus compensation anymore because we've recognized that sometimes the compensations people do, like strategies, actually improve their brains. And that it no longer makes sense because we've learned a lot about neuroplasticity. And we now know that neuroplasticity underlies all behavior changes, including using an external aid or like an app or strategies. So many of our treatment approaches can't be categorized as this. But this all started in the day and age of when we thought, oh, it's going to fix the brain. So I think it's important to think about what we mean by recovery. We can talk about our brains recovering and after head injury, all of you could tell us how different you are now than maybe you were in the beginning, and how networks heal and other places take over functions. We can also talk about recovery of specific cognitive functioning. Importantly, what we can talk about is changes in functional ability. People go from not being able to walk, from not being able to remember moment to moment to being able to function and live independently. So recovery is a very complicated concept. And when we talk about computer-based training, sometimes we forget to talk about the functional abilities, okay? So I'm not going to go through these. The class will learn these next week. These are different types of biological mechanisms that happen when brain changes as people heal and as they get treatment. What I do want to say is that there's a lot of hope, even for people that are 15, 20 more years post-injury. We know that the brain is very dynamic, it's well studied, and it's capable of extensive neurological reorganization. We also know that motor and sensory and cognitive abilities usually improve over time, but that with severe injuries, brain injury symptoms do persist. And that's something we as a society need to recognize and get people better help. Structural changes in the brain, particularly the dendritic fields, Daniel, you could teach us about this, and synapses underlie behavioral changes, and there's many influences of improving synaptic connectivity. And enhanced recovery is associated with environmental stimuli. So the experiments they might use are like rats in that, some of them where they lesion the brain, and half of them have cages with really cool wheels and things, and the other half have boring, no stimulation. And the brains of the ones that are more stimulated have more synaptic connections and change over time. And that we now know, and this is newer research, that patients' motivation and attention and engagement are critical modulators of plasticity, so that people who are doing things like you all are doing right now, stimulating your brain, participating, that is helpful to recovery. I'm going to have you now do your second monitoring of your attention. See whether your sustained attention is staying the same or maybe going down, whether your working memory feels like it's where your ability to hold on to things is staying the same or going down, and whether you continue to use any strategies. And we can chat about that at the end. So what I want to do now is go over the computer-based cognitive rehabilitation. And again, I've mentioned how much advertising and marketing there is, which is why it's important that we know about it. I've already talked a little bit about neuroplasticity, so in the interest of time, I'm going to just move forward. There's two types of studies showing that computer-based changes in brain activity, that people get better on the tasks, and that there's studies measuring outcomes showing that different processing, the brain changes in its processing. But if you put all those studies together, what's key to know is that you do get changes in the brain with repeated drills on computers, but you only get changes that apply to very similar tasks. We call that near transfer. So you get application to a learned task or behavior that's very similar to the drill that you were doing. And far transfer is not so easy. So to a more complicated task like cooking, you don't tend to get far transfer. So near and far transfer of gains, you don't get, is a big issue, because it means that we don't see everyday changes as much as we would like, which is why we need to be careful with using these what we talk about with these computer-based training. This is just a slide reminding me to tell you that over the years, as I've done experiments looking at the response to computer-based training, in the beginning, we had a lot of excitement, but we used to not measure. In the old days, we measured tests. So we were using tests that were similar to the drills. And as we move forward, we then began to look at people's functional changes on real world tasks, and you see less generalization to the functional tasks. So the current thinking for using computer-based cognitive rehabilitation is that we want to have drills that are individualized for the person and match their attention profile, and that we want to pair those drills with some of those strategies that we were talking about so that we don't just put people in front of computers, and that we measure changes on people's functional goals that they're interested in. So what I'd like to do is end with a case example that was in our clinic. It's a 15-year-old male. He had mild to moderate TBI, traumatic brain injury. He fell at school down a stairwell. He was pushed down a cement stairwell. He went to the emergency room. He had a relatively brief loss of consciousness, had ongoing memory issues, severe headaches, and had attention and concentration issues. And so he was hospitalized for a couple days. And then his initial treatment was he was put on cognitive rest and stayed home from school. And then he returned to school and had a shortened day. And then he came to see us about 5 months later. And his complaints were, I cannot concentrate. I'm having trouble with memory, which was really learning efficiency. And I have headaches that get in the way. He was a freshman at an arts program. He was a high-level musician at a special school. And then in terms of psychosocial issues we look at, he had a very solid friend group and a positive outlook towards recovery. So we weren't concerned about any other psychological underpinnings. So it was it was attention issues that we could measure on our attention tests, and his reports of things that were hard for him, we could see were the same areas that he had a hard time on the test. And he had been a straight A student. So he set some goals for himself. I won't talk, this is called a goal attainment scale. And what he wanted to do was be able to practice his guitar. So he was used to playing for hours at a time. And his baseline when he came to see was that he could practice only 60 minutes, which for him was a big decline. And this was kind of what he spent his time doing. So we made a scale about where he wanted to be after his treatment. And then he saw us for 12 sessions. We gave him some of the attention tests, like I mentioned. And we did the computer-based drill training, where we had drills that focused on sustained attention and working memory that were matched to his profile. He also had a strategy that we came up with, and he had an internal self-talk during attention demanding tasks, and he would tell himself to focus. And then also, if there were directions, he would say the directions back out loud. To deal with the headaches, there was a headache relief guide. So those were the 3 different things that we did to help address his attention. And then on the outcome, his symptoms with the headaches went on a score, this is a test, from 38 to 13. And on this battery, this attention battery that tested different types of attention, the subtests in working memory and sustained attention improved, which were the areas that we worked on. And then there was a rating scale that also showed improvements in working memory and sustained attention. And then he met his goal to be able to practice for 2 hours after the 12 sessions that he came up with. So I want to go back for a few slides and talk about this example and apply it to what we were saying in terms of the computer-based cognitive rehabilitation. He got transfer from the drills to guitar playing and being able to sustain his attention, but he did not just have the drills. He also had that strategy of using internal self-talk to get himself to keep focusing. So I think that was a key to what he did. And he was getting management help for his headaches, because the headaches can contribute to the attention issues. So we would only advocate doing this type of drill if the person has very specific types of attention issues, doesn't have a lot of psychological or physical issues that are affecting it, and that we paired them with these strategies. So that's our current thinking with using computer-based cognitive rehabilitation. And that we could see the changes in his, and we can't say which part of our treatment was most important, because as providers, we're not running experiments. We're looking at trying to help everybody. But I hope that gives you an example of kind of going through that assessment, treatment, applying a few kinds of treatment, and then doing those drills. So I'm going to stop there. I know that Daniel wants to have time for questions, so that we could have a dialogue together.
Thank you. And that's a good example. And it's crazy because across all your slides, I'm like, oh, well, given that, what about this? What about this? And it's just like too many ideas at once. So first, does anyone have any questions or thoughts to share? Michelle. Hi,
Hi,
Michelle.
Michelle.
McKay, how are you?
It's so nice to see you.
You too. It's been a very long time.
Yeah,
I'm always a big fan and wanted to
thank
talk a
you.
little bit more about the near versus far transfer and
Okay.
generalization and the importance of that far transfer when you're using some of the computer aided kinds of games, whether it's Brain HQ or Lumosity or,
Yes,
whatever. That's always been a key factor, I think, is making sure that we as professionals are helping the individual understand that far transfer and then ultimately the concept of generalization. So I just wanted to
yes.
get your thoughts
I'll
on
just,
that.
I want to introduce, I don't know why your pictures on my screen and not on the big screen. But I don't know if you were here in the beginning, but I'm teaching this with my grad students. So Michelle's company designs apps and trainings for people with brain injury. And so we partnered on different projects, and she's been a staunch advocate for providing tools and resources, and worked closely with people with brain injury. So I hope all is going well. I'm sorry I've missed
It's
you in the
great.
Eugene. Your question about near and far transfer is super important. Um, when you look at the research, we tend to get really excited when there's changes in functional imaging, or I think that measurement of improvement is what's key. I also think that where we as practitioners, or as practitioners in training, or it's really important, is that we do a good job matching. So I think that sometimes in these experiments, you've got everybody doing the same drills versus the example I gave you where it was matched to that individual's particular drill, to his attention profile. Um,
Yeah,
so
I think that's a really important thing. I was so glad that you mentioned the importance of that because the same thing for everybody just doesn't work. So,
yeah, and I do
yeah.
think that there's can be a role, like you see people playing, you know, you know, some people talk in dementia, like doing dementia prevention crossword puzzles as an example.
Mhm.
If I love crossword puzzles and I'm thinking about it, that's a different than if I'm coming and somebody's having me do crossword puzzles. So that one bullet point about patient motivation and engagement driving neuroplasticity, I think when people are prescribing quote games, that's very different than somebody who's really into that, thinking about it. That's a different brain doing those quote games than somebody who's doing it as a prescription.
Thank you so much. It was
Yeah,
good to see you.
yeah, you too.
And I've had this discussion with other people, but I think the translatability, in my experience and observation of others, the ability to do or relearn things that you used to be able to do is very hard across many baby steps. So the technology gives you a way to bounce back and forth, practicing one or two or a few aspects, but then when you try to translate to real life, it doesn't, or it only goes into things that are really like that game. But because you learn from the game, you didn't learn how to drill the real life side of it. Can take many examples, everything from relearning how to drive to think to all these other problems that come up with brain injury. And that's there's some questions here, so I just wanted to
Yeah,
make
thank
that
you,
point. But
Daniel. I
making
agree.
that jump to real life is what needs to be drilled as well. You touched on that, but there's a lot there to explore, I think.
Looks like Holly has a question.
Yes, Holly. Holly, you're muted.
That helps. Sorry, I'm brain injured. So I don't know if this makes sense, but it's just a question I had. You were highly functional, very highly functional before your injury or whatever, your incident. And now you're rebuilding what you lost. I don't know if this will make sense or it's even appropriate, but I don't even know if that's the right word. But like if your working memory's affected and your attention alternating is affected, and I forgot the other one. I have all three of the things you mentioned. My question is, should you focus on one specific thing and work on that and get that better? Or do you just do the hodgepodge of everything because you need to strengthen your brain overall? I'm trying to, does that make sense?
It makes really good sense, and it's an
Okay.
excellent question.
Okay.
I like to start with where it's getting in the way. So I think the field of cognitive rehabilitation has moved increasingly to functional lens. So where would you say these types of attention are most bothersome to you in your day-to-day life?
Oh, me?
Mhm.
Oh, it's bad. I just realized I've been saying this analogy or whatever the right word is for a year now. And then I realized it's age dependent. So some people that are younger might not even know what the heck I'm talking about. It took me a year to realize that. But I'm kind of like a pinball machine that I'm the ball that just bounces around, and I can't focus. I just can't stay focused. And Daniel's had conversations with me, and I'm sure it's exhausting because I go down 20 different paths because I can't keep focus. I can't even things I write down that I want to tell the doctor. We in the session, my brain, I'll leave, and 3 hours later, I didn't even say what I intended to say. I started down the path, but either they interrupted me or I went tangentially. I think that's the right word. 40 different ways. So I struggle with, I mean, I've left the bathroom water running in the sink for 2 hours in the bathroom, didn't realize I had done that until I came across the door and heard the water running. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm so distractible. I'll go to call my son, and 30 minutes later, I've done 20 different things on my phone or looked at 20 different things, forgetting that I picked up my phone to call my son. Like, it's just the functionality is out the window. Yeah.
So I've been talking to a lot of brain injury people, and with Holly, I think you've injured, it would be literally the capacity of attention, and that's why it applies across all three of the examples that McKay gave.
Yeah.
And you have the
That makes sense.
dysautonomia stuff, and that makes the functioning in day to day. It's not just the attention and other
Well, the TBI
cognitive stuff.
caused the
Yeah.
the TBI caused the dysregulation, which is the dysautonomia. So,
So
yeah,
pairing the autonomic system crash that you have with that attention plus the memory issues, I don't know how a person can manage it, but that's one of the points I was trying to make, that the brain injury problems interact in such a crazy way. Vision
Yeah.
problems, other problems that interact with what
Stamina, all of it. Yeah,
McKay did list
audio
accurately.
processing,
So yeah, it's
visual processing. It's just, yeah, it's kind of like, sorry, this is negative, but it's like a squash bug that survived.
Let me jump in. I have a couple thoughts. I agree with Daniel's impressions. My first thing is that when I hear somebody able to describe and articulate what you're saying with such clarity, I know that there's lots to be done. You have really good self-awareness. You're able to describe it. You can
It took
describe
me,
the function.
yes, it took me 18 months to get my words back. And then I word vomited on everybody. It took me another year and a half to make it more concise. It took me another 6 months to learn to dialogue. Like, I literally, my son had to reteach me how to use my remote. And like, it's just, I'm having to relearn humor, subtext, innuendo, all of it from scratch. So I do
Well, I want to
have,
say one thing, Holly, is that for the students that are here, to be able to hear
yeah,
you describe this is more than 20 million slides I could have given to show you. So I appreciate you explaining what it feels like. One thought, which is really more of a question that I have, is if there's things that are more important to you. So for example, you were talking about pinballing in conversations.
But I mean by
Sometimes
that,
what we do is we prioritize because it can be so overwhelming if you're trying to, in all those circumstances, attention can get in the way. But sometimes people will pick just one thing. We call it JOT, just one thing. So conversation. I'm going to really work on conversation, and you and your son maybe, or you and Daniel and your son can come up with a strategy that works for you. For example, like writing a keyword or what's my main point, and then having that in front of you. And then as you hear yourself deviate, going back to it. Also practice. We do a lot of joint conversation practice with partners, and we might have a strategy that you come up with, and then we practice the conversation. So it doesn't mean it's going to fix everything, but I think taking one arena that is important to you, that you have a lot of examples of, that you can, that happens a lot, so you can practice it a lot. Sometimes people feel good about having something to work on in a particular area. Does that sound at all like it resonates or would be helpful?
no offense, but I kind of got lost.
That makes sense. I'm suggesting like maybe just focusing on conversation.
Yeah.
And coming up with a strategy, for example, writing down the key topic and then keeping that there and then practicing those conversations. So we might call it conversation practice, and then
Well,
not trying to
that's how I
fix.
relearned
And then not trying to fix everything at once.
the dialogue because
Yeah.
I couldn't hold on to and I'm lucky that I don't always find the right words and the wrong words come out, but I'm lucky that I was able to get some of my vocabulary back. So I sound intelligent, even though I no longer am.
I'm going to override that and say you don't sound intelligent. You clearly are. Thank you
Aw,
for help.
thank you.
Thank you for helping us
Holly,
better understand it.
So focusing on the most important aspect of your life to work on next, I think, is a great answer. Well, Nancy also had a question.
Okay, we'll take one
Thank
quick
you.
question, and then I'm going to have to let the next classroom come
Okay.
in pretty quick. Let's see,
Hello.
Nancy. Let me see. There's Nancy. Hi.
My question, I have a targeted area where when you talked about all the different areas for therapy existed, and I understand why that wasn't your example, but mine is new learning. I don't have memory or attention issues, but where I don't already have deep grooves, the beginning to learn, getting the basics is very challenging. So, what do your strategies have to offer in that situation?
That's a really great question. And again, thank you for sharing your profile because that helps us learn. Just from what you said, my guess is that you don't have the attention issues like you said, but you have issues with new learning. And what we call declarative memory, which these students have learned about, so that laying down new information is tricky. That's very common. We have some ways in which we teach people to do new things that makes it more automatic, particularly like procedures. And so that's I can send Daniel some information on that, stuff that we give family members and patients, so that you can, when you're defining what it is you want to know, that you review it in a very specific way, and you build on what you know.
Unfortunately, the building on what I know, the framework, the initial framework is where the problem is. So I can't really build on what I know. I need to get a foundation to begin learning when it's a new subject.
Kind of a hook.
And part of my profile is that this initial brain injury happened at a very young age. And there may be some developmental relationships because of that also.
Oh, that's helpful. So maybe you're missing some foundational knowledge because you were young and you never had that. Is that what you're suggesting?
Um, yes, and however, because like with Holly, I appear and function in areas that I already know well at a very high level, but then the basics on a new subject, I can't seem to grasp, and others find that insulting to help me with because I'm obviously, asking for something I don't need or deserve, which is insane because, like, it's hard to ask and not
Absolutely.
get help. I wouldn't do that.
And I want to share, because I know the time is running out, that Nancy is a person that I've interviewed in great detail about this stuff on the podcast, the first episode and like episode 20 something. And I came to help Nancy with all the baggage of my cognitive rebuild stuff, but she had learned as a child to discuss it and then it entered into her mind. And I'd never seen anything like that, but I tried to help her the way that helped me and it didn't work. And she said what she needed, and then it did work to do some basic learning with I don't remember what it was, a manual for something. But the discussion she needed was what she said to me. And then I was like surprised and really, it was weird because I realized, oh, her brain is totally different than mine, but she's been juggling that, her whole life. So there's a lot more
Yeah.
to talk about
So
here.
it sounds to me
Yeah.
like, Nancy, that I need to go to episode 20 and
One of the episodes, yeah, the
Oh,
ones with
learn.
I
Nancy.
don't know if it was that particular part was on any of the episodes, but Daniel helped me with working my thermostat in my house after many years of not being able to work it all except for manually turn the
And
heat up, turn the heat
yeah,
down, but not program it.
the way you said how to discuss it with you to get the information in your head was something that was a learning experience in art.
That's true. That's true. I dedicate myself to go and watch your episode, and then
I just wanted to throw that in.
I'm sorry that I'm going to have to say an early goodbye because of the classroom, and in order to be able to have the students participate, I could only do an hour.
Can you make
I
me the host before you leave by clicking on the
Yes.
three dots above
Well,
me? So yeah, we'll get the slides and I'll send it out to everyone. So great. Is that cool? Thanks.
okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I learned way more than I gave, so I'm really grateful, and I really appreciate you allowing my students to get to be part of your community for this 1 hour. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. I think a lot came out. So thanks. And yeah,
Yeah, take care.
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good. So this is still recording, I think. We can just keep talking.
Could I ask a question of Nancy? I'm curious, Daniel, of Nancy, how is it that you need to learn new information now? Daniel was talking about working with you and sort of that a different way of learning information. I'm curious as to what you've realized about that, what insights you have about that.
It's always worked best under those circumstances where I lack a framework or the
Mhm.
basics to
Mhm.
have a one-on-one learning opportunity.
Mhm.
Because that way, well, the requirement to that working is that I need to be able to ask my questions, have that person address my questions rather than the standard whatever's in the book or the
Mhm.
manual, because it doesn't line up with the part I don't know, because oddly, and this part is in the I think podcasts, it's like I have these like blind spots where the things that require no effort for another person like have to be constructed and
Mhm.
and made for me to be able to do that. And since it was all of my life, it was hard for me to learn to articulate
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you do you stop, like you mentioned the thermostat that Daniel helped you
Mhm.
with. So do you stop and think about what do I know about a thermostat? What do I know about the concept? Sometimes from a I'm an educator, so from a scaffolding perspective, sometimes that very basic question of what do I already know about this thing or this concept can be helpful because it doesn't lay the foundation I think that you need, that you're talking about, that you need, Nancy, but it does begin to lay a foundation that you can then build upon. So for instance, if you were to say, well, I know what I know the thermostat is to, adjust the heat or the coolness in the house. I know, and you sort of go through and you ask yourself that question a few times, and that then gives you something that you can begin to build on top of. So just a thought. I don't know that that would help, but
There's probably never a moment that I'm not naturally doing any of those things, and it's clearly not
not
a
helping.
solution to
Okay.
um,
Hmm.
getting a framework.
If I could share, oh, sorry, Nancy.
Please
I don't
do.
want to interrupt.
Yeah.
If I could share that I've related with Nancy across, with injury to cognition, the tests and what I was able to talk to the therapist about was about certain, like the processing speed and the fatigue and the, what's it called? The cognitive endurance. But there was really injury to the processes of cognition that I could feel were not in me, and there was many of them, but one of them was getting the information into my head from the outside world, and that was something that Nancy and I related about once I understood how the discussion and one-on-one, and especially with her questions being the things that she needs to get the information in her head, because I still run into that all the time. I'm like, I don't have this and I have this and I don't have a really good memory, but I've built a concept and I can relate about it. I'm juggling all these things. Nancy has a similar juggling of all these things to get the basic information, then do what you want. And then you ask them like a word or a question that triggers the person to think that you're not even listening, and you get in this whole kerfuffle about it, and it's really annoying. That happens a lot, and the building of the cognition because the pieces are not there. The pieces of are not there part is why I wanted to talk about Holly because I feel like with Holly and other people I met, they've injured attention. The capacity of attention is injured, and then it's always a different story for each person. But that I don't know. That's how I related with Nancy, and that's why I think that looking at it and those parts are not working in a person is something that can be made more of a discussion of. And that's not true for everyone. Maybe it manifests only with their divided attention or where they're tired, but still the capacity of attention or cognition is weak or information entering into your mind. And I watched Nancy use the strategies she learned to then get it in her head and if someone's nice enough to talk to her the way she needs it. But it's such a basic request. I believe if the clinicians understood what she wanted, they could be working together really well.
And the crazy thing about it is the minute I get that framework,
It
I
all
can
goes. You've
really
got
learn
it.
really fast and
Yeah.
go far. And and I'm actually already wondering about the advanced things that the person who told me it was easy had never even wondered about, but I couldn't get started because I didn't
Mhm.
have the basics.
And you being here, Nancy, because I'm still thinking about attention, you're not a person that has injured attention, but the problems that you have could be misconstrued as injury to attention. Then
Mhm.
it's not and the discussion is not accurate to what she's dealing with. Um,
Good point, Dan.
I have
Yeah.
several yeah, I have several podcasts with people where it's like that person injured attention very clearly. How it manifests across the list that McKay had, it's like, ooh, this is key and this is key, but maybe it's only because that's in their life keeps happening over and over.
Tried to cool my phone down. Can you hear me now?
Oh yes.
My phone hates Zoom, and I literally have my phone has its own ice pack now because it literally overheats on Zoom. I don't know why. Yeah, I could not follow actually 90% of what she was saying, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm not that level yet because I couldn't follow what she was saying. I read that little blit about functional memory and all the memory stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I have all of that. But like when she started doing all the other stuff that was higher level, I don't know, it wasn't that higher level, but I just couldn't, it was too much. My brain just couldn't intake it.
Your
Does that make
inner
sense?
your inner planner of the pinball to not make it pinball is what you've injured, and that's every discussion that we have. Not, that's why it's not.
I think my pinball analogy is confusing people to what I'm trying
Well,
to
your
say.
pinball analogy is accurate and is good, and there's a lot of reasons why one wouldn't pinball, and those
It's
things.
it's
Yeah,
kind of, the other day I described it as, I came up with the word, I'm physically living a stream of conscious. Like, you know how your brain goes to these different thoughts as you're thinking and talking and walking or whatever. I was physically living that. There was one point after my injury where I went to get up. I don't know if you guys can still hear me. I'll try to make it short, but I had to go to the bathroom. I had to get something out of my purse, and I had to get something to eat. And I was literally walking in circles to each thing, but not accomplishing any of the three. And my son looked at me and said, Mom, you're literally walking in circles. Just go to the bathroom and then come back to get something to eat and then get to your purse. Because I was like, well, I want to do this. I want to do this. But I was literally I'd take 2 steps towards one and then I'd remember the other thing and then go that direction. And then it was nuts. It was like, oh my God.
yeah.
And that was one of the very intense, not remembering something longer than a second, periods of the recovery. But yeah.
If there's parts of mind and inner stuff that used to be there that isn't the stream of conscious, like the voice that manages yourself or the other things that I don't know if you remember those things used to be there, but
Oh,
um
I lost my
yeah,
vision. Well, it's starting to a little bit come back, but I lost my visual ability, my visual memory. I lost everything that I used to picture and know. Like I could write Christmas cards every year just by picturing the person, and then their address would pop up in my brain, and I would just write it down. I have not a photographic memory, but kind of close. I don't know how to describe it, or I did. And after the accident, it just was a black cavern. I couldn't, like, nothing. There was just nothing
right.
there. And the more I tried to make it work, the more it hurt, physically hurt. I just couldn't. So, um, yeah.
So yeah, it's almost too much to talk about. What I like the clinician's perspective on, I call it getting a foothold into something to like try to then work on it, but I don't think that they think of how to work on it in an accurate way. Like that guitar guy example, rebuilding something you knew expertly is different than what you described, Nancy, like for sure. It's like
Yeah.
a lot different. And rebuilding it when it wasn't something you were an expert in is also yeah. There's too much to talk about, but I want to go through our slides again and think about it. And it's like ideas come up. The two things I wanted to say, and I'll say it now, and then maybe in the recording. The brain injury core problems, the problems that each person has. If attention is on your list of problems, that is way different than if because of the other problems your attention is diminished. And she didn't say anything about that, so I think that's good because I think maybe they're not thinking about it like that. Um, and then the other issue is that the brain injury problems that have nothing to do with cognition or attention can highly influence this. And she addressed that with the way emotions can make attention harder, but the emotions is and the psychological examples she gave are not brain injury specific.
What was your second point?
Well, the point that I was addressing was that if someone's very emotional or has a psychological something happening, it's going to affect their ability to pay attention and to behave and to do, which, yeah, that's true because you have like all these butterflies in your stomach or you're so nervous or whatever the emotion is. Um, but that would also be true if you have vertigo or if you have double vision. That's my experience. It's like I
Right.
have double vision. I like seeing this world, and it's like tension is diminished. But once the double vision was dealt with, then I didn't have a attention problem. I had other problems of cognition injured, made the attention very, very slow. I can say that from my experience, and I've met other people like that. And then Holly and several people
And
I've talked to.
processing speed. Yeah, as well.
But processing speed also, it's like because the processes were injured. It's like if you have a staple in your foot and they're measuring you running a race, your speed of running the race is going to be slower, but it's because you have this issue. That was the thing. I could feel parts of my cognition not working.
Dan, can I
Yeah.
jump in?
Process. Yeah, yeah. Hi.
Hi. So I'm
And
a clinician and I took McKay's courses and all that in grad school, and still use a lot of it today. What you're talking about just now, though, I don't know
yeah,
if this is relatable, but and I don't know where I picked this up, quite honestly, but it's, I call it cognitive load.
okay.
And so it's like a lot of
That's
things can
accurate.
contribute to your cognitive load. And I think of it like I've had it described back to me by brain injured people of like a weight or a blanket or it can be the same as fog, but it can also be different than brain fog of just like this cognitive load. The more you have like the emotional side, the other injuries, the vision issues, all of those things contribute to the cognitive load. And then your brain will sometimes, I think, prioritize in a way that you don't want it to prioritize because it's going to take care of, okay, let's keep your heart going. Let's keep, certain basic needs met. And sometimes some of those other abilities are lower on the prioritized list that your brain. So we kind of almost have to override that or see what can we do to lighten that cognitive load to get some of those abilities back to running as efficiently as they are, even if they're still running as a deficit.
So thank you for sharing that, and that is helpful and a good perspective because I
Absolutely.
definitely think the cognitive load aspect exists not only with cognition but with all because brain injury people complain about the fatigue and the exhaustion and the fog. It's all loaded. There's one battery in this case that's injured. It's our brain, and I have a friend actually. He has cognitive load, super overload because his executive function planning
Right.
not there, and he's so then self-critical about himself, which adds to the cognitive load. But he has executive function problems also, so it's like there's a depth into the invisible problems that each brain injured person has, or at least in
Exactly.
my experience. Yeah, so that I was just
Yeah,
saying the
no.
load is a one step higher because of all the other things, and then there's the pieces that make the load.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think the cognitive load can make those pieces even more difficult. Those pieces that are
Right.
always there makes them more difficult or um, harder to overcome.
It contributes negatively, absolutely. And when they're talking about the translation of technology to real life stuff, the application in real life stuff is really hard to do. Hopscotch, the next talk in this series, February 25th, is the only clinical version where I've seen people trying to do that, where it's like, what are you trying to do? How do we help you in your real life? And then building a strategy to manage it in every step of what they're trying to do is going to be hard for a long time. What Holly described, what Nancy described to actually, but have a clinician help you with the boots on the ground to do that. There's going to be a lot of pieces that need help.
The one thing that I would add to that maybe people can ask for themselves is if you are doing one of those computerized um, activities, if I'm doing that with people I work with, then we pause or they get to a stopping point and I say, whatever you're feeling right now, is this familiar? They usually say yes. And then I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. Where else have you felt what you're feeling right now? And that's what gets us to the functional piece. Then they talk about, oh, this is how I feel when I'm doing laundry, or this is how I feel when I'm talking to my loved one. And then we move the discussion and the treatment to functional.
Thanks for explaining that. Nick, you want to say
Yeah,
something?
I wanted to jump in on the cognitive load y'all were talking about. I had my injury about 5 years ago, and I had studied. I've got a bachelor's degree and a law degree before it, and sometimes when I don't remember all the facts I learned, but sometimes I'm thinking a thought, and I know I need the objective statements to make the argument. And I'll remember where I learned about the science in college. And I get so overwhelmed with emotions from the scene, I can't keep processing the thoughts or like sustain my attention through it. So I appreciate that she mentioned that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting bounce. It's almost like the bouncing of the emotional stuff, the inability to have the thought and the cognitive stuff, and then the tension is what falls out.
Yeah, sometimes I get too focused on one specific task that I don't
Yeah.
select the right thing to be focused on. And I was wondering, did
Oh, interesting, interesting.
she had Serene, that one app she said would help process tasks. That's a huge problem I have is the timeliness of doing the information processing.
Across all of this, the ability to work on the problem is what needs to be there and promoted in a person. And I know Nick also is a person I can share to tell Diana that you don't have a lot of external support, which makes it that much harder. Um, Across everything, I think for each person, if you really get to know what they're dealing with, that's the way to try to work on this for each person. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Nick, because it is super hard to manage. Um, I've been putting out these recordings now with the longer discussion, and I think it's getting a lot more views, like, like in the hundreds as opposed to the tens. So that's good. So I might use this recording, just leave it
With
on.
with the real world parts attached to just to the presentation,
Yes,
having that part.
more
Yeah.
more so than I was in the past. And also McKay, um, I don't know if they listen to the podcast, but McKay is someone that probably would like to listen to what we're saying, and I would like them to listen. So that's kind of what this discussion's about.